Hi, my name is Jenny Glass, and I am the diagnostician at the WSU Puyallup Plant and Insect Diagnostic Lab. I have been working here for 20 years and have a wide background in landscape plant problems, diseases of plants, insect pests, and horticultural care of plants. And I love working with landscape professionals because I always learn stuff and we can make a beautiful, healthy landscape by doing diagnosis. So for today, what I'd like to talk to you about is the steps in the diagnostic process. Most of you have experienced plant problems, and we will define a plant problem or a plant disease today as any change in the normal structure or function of a plant. The challenge with diagnosis is that you may see a single symptom such as the death of a plant, or the yellow chlorosis of a leaf, or a wilting and dieback. And that one symptom can tell you that it could be, say, drought stress, or it could be something that leads the plant to drought stress, such as a root rot or a mechanical wounding to the plant. So we need to be able to figure out from those clues on a plant what is going on. Diagnosis involves both a science and an art. The science is the things that you know, the types of plants you're working with, the conditions surrounding that plant in the soil. Many times, the stuff that you're doing in your landscaping work will be enough to diagnose the problem. You forgot to water one week and the plant starts to wilt? Well, probably it's a watering issue. But then there's times where you've done all those things and you still don't have an answer, or often more questions exist. So then at that point, we need to start thinking about what else might be going on. Is there something that we're not considering, like a weather event in the past? Is there a feature of the problem such as the location of the landscape or the source of the plants? And putting all those things together, that is the art involved in diagnosis. You will want to come prepared to do a diagnosis. I consider this packing up your diagnostic toolbox. Most of the tools that you use in your work will be handy in the diagnostic process. For example, the cutting instruments you have, the knives, the pruners, they are crucial in order to figure out what is going on with a plant problem. Because when you look on the outside of a plant, you may see, say, a yellow leaf or a stunted leaf, but you don't know if that leaf is damaged because something lower down in the plant is, and the only way to find that out is to take out your cutting tools like your knife and cut in and see where the plant is live and where it is dead. Another important tool you use is the shovel. Plant problems often show up in the canopy, the leaves, the branches, and yet that reflects a root problem. And so if you don't get to the roots, you are simply going to be guessing. So you pull out your shovel and you dig around and you try to figure out if there's conditions that would lead to things like wounding or rot or stuff like that. And both the pruning tools and the shovel are crucial in collecting a sample. A tool that you might not use every day is some form of magnification. Why is having a magnifier so important? It's important because so much of the stuff that we look at with plant problems is small. Much of it is microscopic, and you're not going to be able to diagnose or identify those things in the field. But the things that you can see, the things that are visible to the unaided eye, most of us need a little help with. So that's when the magnifying lens, the loop come in handy, because an aphid that you could barely see, you could be able to tell many more features about it. If you saw a leaf spot on a leaf, you'd probably know that there was a problem because it's got a spot. But if you pull out the hand lens and look very carefully, you may see the dark sporulation structures of a fungus on that leaf spot, and then that would clue you into the fact that you have a fungal infection going on the plant. The magnifying app on your smartphone is helpful in several ways. First, you have a device usually always in your pocket that you can use as a magnifying glass. And second, many of the new apps have a way to capture that image. And when you can capture an image, that allows you to share what you're seeing with all sorts of people, your colleagues, a specialist, and that helps other people help you figure out what's going on in a plant problem. A crucial point in diagnosis is having the right attitude. So when you encounter a plant problem, many times it can be very, very difficult to figure out what's going on. But if your attitude is, I'm going to figure this out, I'm on an adventure, then you'll get much further in a diagnostic process. Next part about the attitude is you also have to be somewhat humble, because despite your years of landscape work, you often aren't going to figure it out by yourself. So you need to reach out to others, see if somebody else has seen this before, remember your past experiences, know who you can go to for help. So that's crucial to having a good diagnostic process. When you first hear about or notice a problem, one of the first steps is to figure out, is there truly a problem? Many of the problems that catch your eye are things that are normal to the plant. There may be, for example, loss of leaves or needles in fall. Evergreen plants, they're green year-round, but do lose their needles. So right now in the Pacific Northwest, western red cedar is showing large brown needles, and yet it's always the old growth and the new growth looks healthy. You do not have a problem. You're just seeing something normal in that plant. Or another thing that you'll see a lot is yellowing of plants, or what we call chlorosis. There are times when that chlorosis is not supposed to be there. It indicates you have a nutrient problem or a watering issue, or there's a disease or insect attacking the plant. But there are also times when that yellowing is perfectly normal. It's a variegation or some sort of feature that that plant has. After concluding you have a problem in the plant, the next feature is to figure out where on that plant that problem really is occurring. Many times it's going to be one and the same. You'll see a leaf spot and the problem starts on the leaf. Maybe it was attacked by a fungus, maybe it was attacked by an insect. But there will be times when you will look at a plant and it will have a whole bunch of yellow leaves, or a whole branch or two is dying, and that could indicate the problem is there on that branch, or it could indicate there's a problem lower down in the plant on the main trunk or in the roots. So step one after you've discovered that there's a problem is try to determine what tissue of the plant, the leaves, the stems, the trunk, the roots, what tissue is having the problem, where is that problem originating? The second question in diagnosis is, are we looking at a problem that has a non-living origin or a living origin? So most plant problems can be divided into those two categories, living or non-living. So the non-living issues, also known as abiotic problems or plant stresses, are the things that happen to the plant, the weather surrounding the plant, often the extremes such as too hot or too dry, or the rapid fluctuations between two things. So the fall day where it is warm in the afternoon and then it freezes at night. Other types of abiotic or non-living problems can include nutrition to the plant, so fertilization or chemicals around the plant, such as the things you add to the landscape, like herbicides and fertilizers, or types of mechanical injury. So most times in landscapes, one of these abiotic stresses is a factor in the problem, or then it will weaken the plant and promote disease and pest types of issues. The other type of problems are those with living causes. And the living causes can be things you and I can see, like a deer or a bunny or a slug. Or they could be living things that are smaller, like the insects and the mites. Or they could be a living problem related to the plant itself. There are plants, for example, that curl their leaves once it gets hot in the summer, and that's just how they look. Or the other thing that we have usually the most difficulty figuring out is the pathogens. And these can be fungi, bacteria, viruses, and nematodes, and they are not always easy to see, but there will be things we can do to figure out if they are the cause.
You need a lot of background information to get a diagnosis, such as how the plant has been maintained, when the problem developed, and what has been done to manage the problem.
The other thing not to overlook is what is actually going right on the plant, what is healthy, because there will be times where that will give you information as to what is going wrong. So for example, if you have a yellow leaf on a plant, that's going to tell you about maybe nutrition, watering, etc. But if you have healthy buds also on that plant for the next year's growth, you probably don't need to worry about a root rot because the plant was able to create those buds. So that would indicate to you that a root disease is probably not the total cause of the problem. So when you're asking questions, who, what, where, when, why, how are just wonderful questions that are super important to get the answers to. Symptoms are what you notice on a plant. They're the problem the plant is having. They're the way the plant expresses that problem. They can be any change in the form, structure, or development of a plant. Symptoms come in a wide array of different appearances. They can be things like yellowing on a plant, a term we call chlorosis. They can be necrosis or death of plant tissue, and that necrosis can be in the form of a leaf spot or a dead part of a branch called a canker, or an entire dead plant, which we would call a blight. They can also be things like wilting. Now, wilting is how the plant responds to a variety of things, from drought stress to the infection of the vascular tissue by a fungus. So there's all these different things that the plant is doing to try to show you that there's a problem going on and something that you are going to help it solve. If you're ever getting overwhelmed when you're trying to figure out what's going on, one of the things I always remind myself is that thanks to the internet these days, any word can be looked up, so don't get overwhelmed, just know that you can look up the information as you need it. Another thing we look for in the diagnostic process is the presence of signs. Signs are the organisms that are actually doing the damage to the plant. So the signs you're going to see are things like the insects and mites. These are visible to the unaided eye, and if you have that magnifier, it really helps to see these. You can often see things that they leave behind, such as the fecal material or frass. Or you can see a cast skin, a shed exoskeleton, where the insect is getting bigger and it leaves its old exoskeleton behind. So signs are crucial for diagnosis. The challenge is that when you get to the living causes that are caused by pathogens, many of the pathogens are not visible in the landscape. When you can see pathogens, such as a sporulation of powdery mildew on a leaf surface, you aren't actually seeing a single one, you're seeing them in mass. So there's times when you can see the sign of a pathogen because you see so much of it, you see a huge population. But by and large, many of the signs are going to require the magnification or some sort of other types of testing, like sending it to a specialist who has a microscope or some sort of test. The other key part when looking for signs is that there are times when you won't see them, but that isn't going to rule out the fact that there wasn't an organism involved. So you may look for an aphid, and yet by the time you look for it, it is flown off and is on its other host, or it may be overwintering under the roots of the tree. So there's times when you will look for signs, not see it, but please don't think that means that you can rule out living causes. Instead, what you have to say is, I don't see it. Is there a reason why? And then we talked about that art, trying to determine whether the art of diagnosis is not there, was it not there and has moved on, or do I need some sort of tool in order to see it? The symptoms, or how the plant is showing the problem, are distributed in space and time. It is important as a landscape diagnostician to try to figure out characteristics of those patterns. The reason for this is that there are patterns that are going to show up for non-living stresses that are usually different than patterns that show up for living causes. So the first thing to look at is where on the plant is the problem happening. Are there areas of the plant where you see the problem and areas where you do not? Are there others of that plant in the landscape, and how are they impacted? Look around the affected plant and see if there are other types of plants that are affected too. Could it be related to the plant family? Could it be related to the location of that site, such as a soil type or a weather condition like an afternoon sun? So you're going to ask a lot of questions. There is not probably a bad question to ask when trying to look at the patterns both in space, within the plant itself, and within the landscape, and with time. So timing is things like, when in the year did the problem happen? Does it seem to be spreading? Is there a start and a stop time? So when you've asked those particular questions, the keys you're looking for are the distinctions between symptoms that are going to suggest to you the problem is a abiotic stress and symptoms that tell you that it might be a living cause. In general, stresses, your windstorms, your nutritional issues, they often show up very uniform on a plant. So maybe it's all the plant, or the south side of the plant, or all of the plants in a landscape on the south side. So there's some sort of uniform appearance to that problem. They often happen quite quickly. You know, a water stress event could happen over the course of a couple weeks. And then because there's nothing reproducing, there's usually a start and a stop time to the damage. So the plant maybe starts looking good in the spring, the damage event happens to it, it shows the symptoms, and then once that damage event is done, plant growth will then look relatively normal, so a start and a stop time. Conversely, the problems that have living causes, such as the pathogens, insects, and mites, well, they have an organism involved, and that organism is usually moving and usually spreading and reproducing in time. So what you'll see in that particular situation is a gradual onset of the problem. We aren't going to notice the first aphid or the first couple leaf spots, fungal leaf spots. We're going to notice when the population starts to get kind of big. It'll start from the center, and then it'll spread usually into other parts of the plant and spread from that one infected plant to an unaffected plant nearby. So gradual onset, spread with time, getting worse with time, and often maybe a little bit narrower host range, because for example, a problem that shows up on a rhododendron may show up on an azalea, but not necessarily a yew hedge nearby. So those are the features that are going to tell you that you probably have a problem that has a living origin involving a pathogen or some sort of pest. Plants get sick too. A plant disease is a dynamic interaction of three main factors. The first factor is the plant itself. The plant must be susceptible to a particular problem. Second of all, that particular problem or pathogen needs to be in the environment near that plant. And third, at the point where the pathogen and plant are interacting, the environment must be conducive for the establishment of the disease. What I refer to as overlapping circles of influence is crucial for two reasons. The first reason is because that is the key information that you're going to need in a diagnostic process, that the plant that you're looking at will get the disease that you think it is, and that disease is present in this area. So make sure that you look around you in the landscape, ask yourself, based on your horticultural knowledge, ask your colleagues for information about what gets there, because there's no reason to try to solve something if you're not getting the two combinations correctly. Second thing is that the weather is very, very important too. So you may think that the picture looks perfect for such a certain disease plant combination, but you know, if it's a problem that occurs after 100 degrees and it's still spring, it's not going to be that problem. Think about plant disease, plant, and the environment. And then the second thing is, it's more important for you landscape professionals, is that those are the three things you're also going to influence when you decide on management. You may prune out a damaged part of the plant and thereby remove the pathogen from the equation. You may prune the plant for really good air circulation, and that will reduce humidity, and that will make the environment less likely for a fungal disease to occur. So keep in mind plant, pathogen, and interacting with the environment as the key features in diagnosis and in management. One of the common groups of pathogens you'll encounter in the landscape are the fungi. Fungi are organisms that feed on plants, and they cause a wide array of different types of problems in plants. Leaf spots, dead parts of stems called cankers, root rots, rust diseases, powdery mildews. There's just a ton of different fungi out there that can impact plants. Another group of organisms is the oomycetes, or also known as the water molds. And these pretty much work and function like a fungus, but they aren't true fungi. They are more closely related to brown algae. And the ones that you're going to experience in the landscapes are many of the ones that attack the root systems, such as your Phytophthora and your Pythium diseases. The key for diagnosis here is that these go hand in hand with water. So if you have saturated soil conditions, you could potentially have one of these oomycetes or water mold diseases. Bacteria are single-celled organisms that require water for both the movement of the pathogen and its ability to get into a plant. What you will often see with a bacterial problem is leaf spots. They're often angular in shape. There's often a yellow halo to them related to some of the chemicals that the bacteria gets off. And then once they get in and well established in the plant, often large portions of the plant will die, and we call that a blight. Viruses are submicroscopic particles that get into a host cell, in this case a plant, and then hijack the plant's cellular machinery for reproduction purposes. So a virus-infected plant, sadly no cures for those, but what is going to happen is you will see one of probably three things. First of all, there are many viruses that make the plant's growth very, very unusual. Yellow chlorosis everywhere, wrinkling of leaves, etc. The second type of virus problem you may experience is the one that I call think of anything else, because it looks like a weak, sick plant, and we may think it needs water, it needs fertilizer, but in fact, much of the plant energy is going to producing the virus, not to doing the plant processes. And then there's lots of times where there isn't anything you and I notice, so we don't have to worry about those. So keep that in mind. You don't have to worry about all these problems. And then the last group of really common pathogens that are in landscapes would be nematodes. These are small roundworms living in the soil water. And fortunately, in most of our landscapes, there is such a variety of different plants that the population of one particular nematode rarely gets to the point where you and I are going to notice that there's a real problem. So you need to have a pretty big population before you start to see wilting or chlorosis, something that shows that the nematodes are attacking the root system. Sampling is a crucial part of the diagnostic process. So the first thing you need to do is, take some time, stop and look, see all around you as to what's going on. This is a great time to pull out that notebook or your notes feature on your smartphone and start taking some notes. So once you've determined there's a problem, then you want to go collect that sample. I often get asked, well, doesn't cutting into the plant or pruning off plants damage the plant? Well, of course they do. But the key is that doing a small amount of damage at the point of sample collection will give you answers that will help that plant out in the future. So make sure that the sample you're looking at or collecting is representative of what's going on in that plant. If you look at a plant and you see it has yellowing and necrosis, don't just pick the yellow part, or don't just pick the necrotic part or the dead part. Pick them both. Or if you see a problem that's up high in the canopy, you're going to have to figure out some way to cut it there, because the branch on the bottom that's nice and healthy and green isn't going to tell you much about what's going on way up in the tree. Second of all, whenever possible, you want to check the area between the healthy and the damaged part of the plant. That margin between healthy and damaged is often where the pathogens reside, or where you can find the pests, insects and mites, etc., doing the damage. So definitely include some healthy tissue when you're going to prune out a branch. Then key feature is that that good quality sample will then help you figure out a quality diagnosis, because you're not going to get a great diagnosis from a really bad sample. And then the last thing to think about, once you have that sample, take really good care of it. Put it into a bag, or a container so it doesn't get smashed, that it doesn't dry out, it doesn't start to rot. If you see an insect on the plant, isolate that into a separate container so it doesn't get lost in the overall sample. Taking care of your sample will allow other people to help you should that be needed. So let's review. You notice a problem. You stop and you investigate. The first thing you're going to look for is, where on the plant is that problem really likely to occur? Is it a root problem? Is it a branch problem? Once you have that, you're going to gather information. You're looking for patterns that suggest to you that the problem is rapid onset or gradual onset, that it is spreading with time or not spreading with time, that it is uniform distribution or a random distribution on the plant. Things that are going to key you into the fact whether it is a living or a non-living cause. Once you have that distinction, you're going to try to figure out which individual factor. So if you think it's a non-living cause, could it be something in the physical environment surrounding the plant, the heat, the water? Could it be something related to the chemistry around the plant, such as fertility or a pesticide? Or could it be some sort of mechanical injury from a bad pruning cut from a windstorm? If you think the problem has a living cause, your options are large animals, such as deer or slugs, the plant itself, say it just wilts in the middle of summer because that's how it copes with heat, your aphids, your spider mites, or some sort of pathogen. So once you have all that figured out, it's time to wrap up the diagnosis. You've got your diagnosis, and then you want to make sure that it is accurate. So one of the first things you could do is pull out a reference and see if all the ideas that you're coming up to look similar to what you are seeing. You could ask somebody else in the landscape industry or a specialist like a diagnostician. When you have a diagnosis, you usually then have ways to manage it. Watch to see if it's actually working or not. If it's not working, then you might have to go back and reassess the diagnostic process. Diagnosis may seem daunting, but rest assured, you have the skills to do this. The things that you learn on your job, the tools that you take to work, the relationships you meet with your colleagues and other specialists. You could come to the diagnostic lab. WSU Puyallup or WSU Pullman is willing to help you. I hope that when you're faced with a problem, you have some happy adventures in getting to a diagnosis, because the key is going to be a landscape that is beautiful, that is useful, and doesn't spend a lot of our time working on plant problems.